Being Indian is what my mother taught me, and my father sort of set an example of integrity, of honesty, and hard work. He was a policeman, worked for all.
Civil servant child's life that you grew up in. You grew up in Delhi, where we are today, in Moti Bagh, which is very much bureaucrat, civil services central, DPS RK Puram. And then you have all of these classic gold star degrees, IIT, IIM. Did you think then at that age that this would be your life today?
No. I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
The views of a critic of the Modi government, that is how you are cast today. Do you see yourself as that?
No, I see myself as a honest, I speak what I think is right. I was not happy that a member of the BJP, Mr. Subramaniam Swamy, was unleashed without any restraint whatsoever. I mean, the man has no decency. But the way he spoke while I was in office without defense from the government was to my mind, not appropriate.
I think as a reporter, I'm aware that there are political parties that reached out to you. Right. They wanted you to take a Rajya Sabha seat. I think the Aam Aadmi Party was keen on that at some point. There was some talk that you might work with Prashant Kishore. Did you ever at any point seriously consider, maybe your answer was no, but did you seriously consider joining politics at any point? Dr. Rajan, after all these years, you still have an Indian passport. You're still an Indian citizen. I want to start by asking you what being Indian means to you.
Wow. What
unexpected first question.
What an unexpected first question. Look, actually, being Indian is what my mother taught me. And my father sort of set an example of integrity, of honesty, and hard work. He was a policeman, worked for all, came back and retired as a policeman. My mother was a homemaker, but always compassion, love, within the family, for people outside. And, to some extent, that's the India that I think of when I think of India. It's obviously a very diverse country, but it's held together by love and decency. And that, to my mind, is what is worth fighting for.
You never thought of giving up your citizenship?
No. I mean, I have an allegiance to the country. It's obviously much easier to get visas anywhere if you have another passport. You don't have
shorter lines at airports.
You have shorter lines in airports. You don't have to give your life history to everybody on the potential that you might be an immigrant. But I still feel that sort of sense of, what's the right word? Electric shock when I hear the national anthem and I'm sitting up.
Goosebumps.
Goosebumps. That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
And it feels good. I don't think I could feel that for any other country.
Yeah. Your newest book, it's in my hand, Breaking the Mold, Reimagining India's Economic Future. But before we get to what's in this book and talk about all things economics, let's start a little bit at the beginning. You spoke about your father working as a very senior officer with RANW. In fact, he almost became the chief of RANW. What was it like to grow up as the son of a spook? When did you understand that your father was a spy, effectively?
Well, we did not know when we were abroad. We were too small. We were in interesting places. In Indonesia, soon after the coup. Actually, he was there during the coup. We were there. And, they killed over 250,000 people at the low count. And my mother was there with him. She didn't want to leave him. All the embassy women were asked to go back home. So it was an interesting time. And then we went to Sri Lanka when there was a insurgency there. And we didn't go to school for a year.
How old were you?
In Indonesia, I was about 7, 8.
Maybe too young to understand, maybe thought of your father as a diplomat, conventional diplomat?
No, they didn't let on.
Yeah, because you never say you're RAW.
And obviously they didn't want us to be telling our friends and so on. So it was when, after a state posting in Belgium, my father said, look, we need these kids to have some schooling. So we went to Belgium and we studied in a French school. So I learned French there. And, partly because on government salaries, you couldn't afford the British school. And then we came back to India and then we learned that he wasn't actually a diplomat. He was a spy. But we didn't know what that meant either. And then, we adjusted.
But I mean, if you're a consumer of espionage movies like I am, it's kind of thrilling also to discover this, or was it not?
It is, but it's more John le Carré than James Bond. Yeah. I mean, he didn't go and flash his sports cars. I'm not sure.
And bevy of women.
Indian spy. And I don't think my mother would have stood for a bevy of women. But later on, when you hear the stories and what they were trying to do, including sort of prevent the Pakistan nuclear program, I think that there were actual actions. And, right from the beginning, we were always trying to extract more from him. And as he was always reticent.
Yeah, as he should be.
As he should be. Even now, many years after, if you try and probe him and say, what were we really doing there? You don't get an answer. He's still the reticent policeman.
Let's start talking about the very classic civil servant child's life that you grew up in. You grew up in Delhi, where we are today, in Moti Bagh, which is very much bureaucrat civil services central, DPS RK Puram. And then you have all of these classic gold star degrees, IIT, IIM. Did you think then at that age that this would be your life today?
No. I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Really?
That was... At the age of 14, what do you think? You die in some glorious way, and then you read real war novels and you say, it's not so exciting. It's much more painful, grime, dirty, and so on. But my father even got me the papers for NDA, and for some reason that passed me by. And then I said...
Did you ever take the exam?
I didn't take the NDA exam. But I was at the point where I was ready to sign up. Then my cousin went through it and he wasn't very happy. And so I said, well, let me wait and see what happens next. But, then I went to the IITs and again, the thought of sitting for the civil service exams. But again, it's even then it was quite a production. You had to spend a year studying, and in the meantime, I got into an MBA, and it seemed like getting into industry was the right thing. But the MBA also gave me an interest in finance and economics, which had been there at the back of my mind. I always was wondering, how do we develop as a country? Why aren't we developed? Why are we so why do we have rationing still? This was in the 70s when I came back from Europe. And so, one thing led to another. And I spent a few months in the Tatas, but then I got a scholarship. And right about that time, it seemed like, stay in business or go. Somehow in business, even in the early days, it seemed like you had to suck up a little bit to get forward. And that sort of irritated me.
I mean, are you really saying you don't have to suck up in government?
I haven't had to, fortunately, because I've been in positions where
you had a degree of autonomy.
I was already in a position of autonomy. If I had to climb in government, the normal way, I don't think I'd ever have made it. I just can't do that.
I want to come to your years in government, but your latest book, Breaking the Mold, talks about following an Indian way of growth. And there are many people, typically for the polarized times we live in, who've received whatever little bits they've seen of this book as the views of a critic of the Modi government. That is how you are cast today. Do you see yourself as that?
No, I see myself as a honest. I speak what I think is right, and sometimes it involves praise. Sometimes it involves criticism. When the environment is of everybody praising, you stand out. Oh, this guy has something bad to say. And then people latch on to everything bad you say without also seeing that you're saying something good. You become the critic.
Yeah.
And that was happening to me even when I was governor of the RBI, because I used to give, reasonable speeches on our way forward. And I used to read the reporting of the speeches after I gave them. And it was every sentence that could be possibly critical of the government was taken many times out of context. And that was the headline.
Yeah.
It seemed as if people wanted a critic. And I mean, there's much.
I mean, news gravitates, as a journalist, I must say, to bad news.
What is newsworthy? What is newsworthy? And what was newsworthy was not praise of the government. Everybody was doing that. What was newsworthy was criticism. That said, I mean, I keep telling people I was as critical of the Congress government as I have been of the Modi government. And I worked with the NDA government before the Congress government came in. I'm happy to offer my advice, my suggestions.
Oh, you worked longer with the NDA government than
No, I worked, the NDA government lasted for about 5 years. I worked really with Mr. Yashwant Sinha when he was finance minister. I was college friends with his son, Jayant Sinha, and we worked on some of the tax.
That was earlier.
Was earlier. Then I went in, was an advisor to Dr. Manmohan Singh, actually via Montek Ahluwalia, whom I got to know very well at the IMF. And so then I became an economic advisor to the government officially. And then I became governor of the RBI.
And as governor of the RBI, you worked longer with the BJP.
I was, which they forget. More months I worked about 8 months with the Congress, the rest of the time with the BJP. The other thing that nobody remembers is that I raised interest rates during the Congress regime, cut interest rates during the BJP regime. But no, I'm the guy who raised interest rates on them, and it just makes no sense.
So I'm old enough to remember that when this whole sort of noise around your tenure as governor was taking place, and the noise was both sometimes good, sometimes bad, the Prime Minister actually defended you in an interview to Times Now. He called the attacks by Subramaniam Swamy on you, then very personal, as inappropriate. Mr. Jaitley defended you in public. What do you think? And, I don't think anyone's ever had a chance to ask you this outside of the context of immediate news headlines. So I want to try and understand that today. What do you think went sour between you and the government when you were governor? Do you think it was because you took public positions on issues like religious tolerance in a speech I think you famously made at the IIT Delhi? Do you think it was monetary policy, your focus on inflation and the clash on interest rates? What was it?
No, I think if you look at the outcomes, they were all very good. Inflation came down significantly. By the time I left, it was within the range that we had set out, starting from near double digits. If you look at our foreign exchange reserves, they had been built up. If you looked at all the programs, UPI started in my time, and the bank cleanup, which we had worked with the government, which we had told the government lots of cleanup needed, but you will get credit for it if you do it. They had agreed, we had embarked on it, and the cleanup was underway. So I don't think you could fault performance. For what it's worth, I was Euromoney Central Banker of the Year. I was Global Central Banker of the Year for Banker magazine, and Economic Times wanted to give me something. I said no, not while I'm in office in India. I won't take it from an Indian magazine. And so everything, by all the metrics, it was fine. I think a couple of things. First, the government didn't defend me until I was done. So we had decided to part ways. That was when the defense came. I was not happy that a member of the BJP, Mr. Subramaniam Swamy, was unleashed without any restraint whatsoever. I mean, the man has no decency, but the way he spoke while I was in office without defense from the government was to my mind, not appropriate.
Did you ever raise it with them?
I did.
With the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister?
I don't want to say who I raised it with. I did raise it. I didn't get a response until after we parted ways. In terms of why we parted ways, I don't want to speculate. We'll leave it at. I don't think it was performance. I think everything the government claims credit for today in terms of cleaning up the banks, in terms of keeping inflation low, was all happening in my time. And continued, of course, with subsequent governors. I
have questions on the bank loans, but in a moment. Your letter, when you did release the letter saying that you would not be staying for a second term, you hinted, and this has been widely speculated on, that left to yourself, you wanted to stay on to see some of the changes, some of the reforms that you had brought in. But after discussions, I'm paraphrasing here, after discussions with the government, you decided it was better to part ways. Were you keen on a second term that the government did not give you?
No, what I wanted to do, and people sort of constantly sort of confuse hankering for position with completing a job. I mean, I had been there, done that. It wasn't about staying on as RBI governor. It was about completing a job I had started, which was cleaning up the banks. I thought that was extremely important for Indian growth. And you can see it now. Now that the banks have clean balance sheets, they're more willing to lend. I could see the clogged up balance sheets inhibiting lending, and I made a couple of speeches on that. They needed to be cleaned up. I wanted to see that through because I was determined that we would get the industrialists who were holding out to repay. And in fact, a year ago at one of these international conferences, one of those industrialists came to me and said, "Sir, humne paise wapas de diye." And I was actually happy because he thought that was his duty. And they simply didn't have that sense earlier. It was like, it's given by the public sector banks and we can continue defaulting with impunity. I think that the message also, the government brought in the bankruptcy code and so on. All those sent a very strong message, you have to repay, and the system was cleaned up. I think that was a good thing.
But to oversee these changes?
I wanted to spend some time, but I didn't want an entire second term. That wasn't
a portion maybe of the second term?
Just to see this through.
And it didn't happen because the professional relationship became untenable?
No, I had good relationships with Mr. Jaitley and Mr. Modi. Of course, I knew that the demonetization was coming, and I had counseled very, very strongly against it. I said, let's leave
Chidambaram said
Yeah.
that he thought you were not given a second term. I mean, he said this in an interview. He thought you were not given a second term because of your views on demonetization. Is that what you believe?
I do not want to speculate. I don't want to put ideas. I don't know. All I'm saying is it wasn't performance.
Let me ask you one more question about this and we'll move on. There are those who argued that today, when you speak about the need for diversity, your book also talks about the place of religion, what Hinduism is for you, what appeasement, the debate around appeasement. But today you're a free agent. There are those who say that as Governor RBI, you should not have been making comments on issues that had nothing to do with monetary policy. Do you look back and feel like, hey, maybe I should have zipped it?
Not really. Actually, I have no sleepless nights about what I did.
Any regrets?
See, put it the other way. If there is a wave in public that you disapprove of strongly because it hits at everything you believe in, as a public servant, do you have a duty sometimes to say this is not right?
But do you say it in private or public?
Well, that's the question. You have a platform.
Yeah.
You know that using that platform will bring sort of cost to your institution. So you don't want to use the institutional platform. But can you use a semi-private platform that you have? Now, it's very hard to separate the two. That's why I use the convocation address at IIT Delhi to talk about respect and tolerance for each other. Because I thought at that time, with all the hate that was going on in public discourse, that as a public servant, it was good to say that this is what I believe. And interestingly, the next week I met Mr. Jaitley and he said, what you said is exactly what I believe.
He didn't reprimand you for making the comments?
Absolutely not. In fact, part of the reason I started talking outside of monetary policy is precisely because there was this constant, let us reinterpret what he's saying about, interest rates, this, that. Last thing you want to do as a public servant is to move markets and then to have to retract what you said because you're moving markets. So, it was actually a conversation with Mr. Jaitley where I said, look, I'm going to speak outside of monetary policy because let's leave it just for the monetary policy.
So he never said to you, Raghu, I agree with what you said, but maybe you shouldn't have said that in public.
Never.
And you got no calls from the Prime Minister's office?
No, I did not get calls from the Prime Minister's office.
But there were others who told you, be quiet? Who were those others?
There were many, some well-wishers and others.
Yeah.
But, I don't think that, look, I am not the kind who will keep quiet when I see something which I don't believe in happening.
So you don't regret how you handled those public speeches?
Not a moment.
Let's talk about demonetization. A recent book by Subhash Garg actually picks up this question of whether Raghuram Rajan, as RBI governor, placed his objections to demonetization in a note. And I happened to interview him, so I have some details on this. His argument is that you met with the Prime Minister, you possibly verbally objected or put forth your views on demonetization. But when he sought a record of what happened in that meeting, who said what did you actually say? He says that he got a kind of covering note, a kind of summary note that did not give him the details of your exact position on demonetization. I know in a previous book you did say, as you are saying today, that you warned of the consequences of doing this. Was that on record? Was that verbally?
There is a note on record which was given to the Prime Minister's office.
A note on record? Detailing what?
The views of the RBI.
And the RBI at that time under you thought what about demonetization?
I think you have to sort of see what was asked and what was answered. What was asked was what would the consequences be? And what was answered was here are the potential consequences and here are alternatives that you must consider.
I think if I'm not wrong, you have said previously that it's not that you were totally opposed to the idea of demonetization. You thought there were short-term consequences and long-term possible benefits, but it worked only if there was enough currency, enough sort of currency to circulate, that we wouldn't see what happened right after demonetization.
I don't think I was ever a fan of demonetization. Right from the beginning, I was clear that this was something that our sort of people would find ways around. The ones that were who had ill-gotten gains, while it would subject the rest to a lot of harassment, pain and suffering as they tried to get things done. But almost surely, if you wanted to go down this route, you had to print the money first. You shouldn't do it when you don't have the money printed.
Did your notes say that?
Yeah.
Don't remember?
No, I think we gave a time for when it would be printed also.
What was the response to that note?
It went in.
You never heard back?
No, not on the note.
Because we now are told that there were extensive consultations with the RBI on demonetization over a few months before it happened.
I think the decision was made to go ahead. And remember, this is the time when we had this is after the Commonwealth Games, when a certain minister was opposed to the Commonwealth Games and didn't sort of build stuff up. And then we had, to catch up towards the end. So my view was, and this is on the basis of legal advice that we got at the RBI, you cannot stand against it. If the government can force you to do it, including they have this clause in government which can force you, they can invoke that. So you basically have to accept what the government decides.
Or resign. I think you said somewhere that if you were RBI governor when it happened.
Yeah, I mean, you always can.
If you felt strongly, theoretically you could resign.
If you feel strongly, and my wife kept telling me, you'll feel strongly, but you'll feel that without you there, it'll be even worse as you tackle this thing. So you will stay on and it'll be forever linked to your name. I don't know what would have happened. This is a hypothetical. But the, where were we? I'm sorry.
The detailing of the opposition to demonetization.
Yeah, I think we basically said, here's the time frame that we will need to start printing notes. And people keep asking, why the 2,000 rupee note? Because that was the only note which was large enough to print within the time frame to replace the entire 1,500. And I remember, when I knew the decision had been made, I said, okay, let's go print these because we don't want the country to be without the notes when this happens. And there was a time frame given for that when we needed to print enough to substitute. The other thing I pleaded with the authorities, and I will not name who I pleaded with, was don't do the 500s. Because the 500s are still used in normal exchange. Do the thousands, because that gets you much of what you want. If people are holding, they will hold in the thousands. But the 500s are going to be, and that will also give us the time to print enough.
Did your note talk about these specifics, but also record your disagreement? Or did it kind of say, this is, if you're going to do it, this is the better way to do it?
I think it touches on all this. It touches on all this. It also says here are some alternatives to demonetization.
So you would say that the government was well aware that as RBI governor, you were opposed to demonetization.
Yes. And to some extent, you can imagine the note is always produced by an institution. The verbal is always by an individual. An individual in conversation can be even more forceful than a note.
And you met the Prime Minister?
I met every echelon that would listen to me.
And what did they say?
Yes, yes.
And then demonetization happened?
Yes.
The other big issue that we need to talk about is bad loans, bank loans. You tried to clean this up. You said that was one of the reasons you wanted a little more time, actually, which didn't happen. Huge political controversy because you are on record as saying most of these bad loans were sort of given between 2006 and 2008. These were UPA years. But later you write to the PMO in 2015 when it's the BJP government in power. So this has been a source of much speculation. Tell us about, what happened. Obviously, most of these loans were during the UPA years, right?
I think the wrong way to characterize it is UPA years.
Okay.
The right way to characterize it is in the euphoric pre-financial crisis years.
Okay.
Before then, it was every project was finished on time, things were going well, and bankers were running after promoters with checkbooks. Take my money, take my money. That was how, some bankers and some promoters described it to me. Then we had the global financial crisis and the slowdown, coupled with, remember, a long period in which no permissions were given for environmental clearances, etc. A whole bunch of infrastructure projects went completely off track because once you borrow money and the clock is ticking, you basically can't pay. Now, there was fraud also. There was, corruption in some of the loans, but it was also primarily the usual boom bust in bad loans. Lots of loans given in good times based on past record. Suddenly the world changes and suddenly those don't pay off. Remember those gas loans to gas operations, and then we didn't have the gas because Reliance, that fine didn't materialize. So things like this, there was lots of sad stories of what had happened and lots of bad loans. The problem was a couple. One, the RBI, had earlier said it would exercise forbearance, I presume, on the basis of, well, maybe this is temporary and we can, this will get dealt with. And partly there's always a pressure from the political establishment. Don't push too hard. You may make some of these things break.
Yeah.
So we had forbearance till, I think it was 2014. And I was very much against continuing forbearance because these were no longer temporary problems. These were serious problems which we needed to clean up. So I said, we're going to end forbearance. Now, the problem is, how do you clean up when you don't have a bankruptcy code? We didn't have a bankruptcy code. And every time we have a better way of extracting money back from the borrowers, they figure out a way through the courts to stymie the thing. That had happened with Surface, that had happened with the debt recovery tribunals.
Yeah.
So we had to find new ways to push the banks to recover, but also to recognize. So first recognize, then start recovering, right? So we created a whole sort of set of structures. I remember meeting after meeting in the RBI. How can we make this? How can we shape this? Then Arundhati Bhattacharya from the SBI would come with, 2-page note on why this should not work, or 3-page. I mean, she was fantastic. I really admire her term at the SBI. But it gave us a sense, okay, maybe this is la la land. Let's try and make it more sort of practical. And we kept changing till we got something that looked like it might work. And then I said, time to recognize. So that was what took us to 2015. It also, I think, depended on three stellar people. One, my deputy governor, Mr. Mudra, and one, the executive director, and finally the head of supervision. Both of those were women. And the head of supervision was tough as nails for the first time. And she started saying, okay, we need to get them to recognize A has this okay on the books, B bank has it as default, C bank has something else. We need to clean up. And she and her team went after it in a superb way. And they, came up with a number which was huge. So I went to Mr. Jaitley and I said, look, this is a big number. But if we don't start this process, here's the line, here's what it looks like. Public sector banks no longer offering credit because they've got all this stuff clogging their books. Private sector banks are still offering credit because they don't have this stuff. They escape from it. We need the public sector banks to clean up. And he said, okay, how much? I said, here's what we can offer in terms of capital because we can reduce some of the regulations, put some capital into the public sector banks. This is how much you have to do. And so he said, okay. And that's how we started the, that's when the cleanup started. And for a few quarters, we understood the problem of the banks. We staggered it out. It took a few quarters for them to completely come clean. But I think that was the beginning of the recovery.
I think this seems to be like in some ways, what you feel is your proudest sort of change that you were able to bring in?
No, there's...
you spoke very passionately about it.
I thought it was important.
Yeah.
I do think we still have to examine the debt recovery system because the big guys get away, the small guys get squeezed.
I was just going to say that there was wild speculation in the media about the list of willful defaulters, right? Who were these defaulters, etc., that you'd sent this list. Yeah. Had you sent a list with names?
We did send a list. There's no big hue and cry was made of that. It was just guys that seemed to get away without anybody with, the trail runs dry. And you say, the more this happens, the more others say they want to do it because, you got away with impunity. So I thought it was very important for the authorities, especially the ED and the CBI, to go after these guys and to actually catch them, because they seem to run away to Dubai and or somewhere in the Middle East and hide.
Yeah.
And everybody knew they were there, and we couldn't do anything about that. But you asked proudest moments. I mean, we brought down inflation, and inflation has stayed low. People don't. Our ability to keep interest rates low during the pandemic and post-pandemic, to not have to hike them, is because we have some credibility on inflation that we've obtained, and the inflation targeting system was important. But UPI, 10 billion transactions a month. It started out small, but as I keep saying, I played a minor role in it. It started in my time. You get credit for everything that starts without having done too much. But the one significant thing that I think the RBI in my time did was to open it up to non-banks, which was not a easy decision, because the banks were saying, no, this is payments, this is our bailiwick. And, central bank often listens to the banks who are their main clientele. Yeah. We opened it up to non-banks. 95% of transactions today are done by the non-banks, 5% by the banks.
Fascinating. Now, when you left the RBI, your last line said that you would be available to serve your country in any capacity in the future. There has been endless speculation about your possible entry into politics. You've always said, it's not for me. My wife would leave me. She disapproves. That always suggests that left to yourself, you may have. So when you walked with Rahul Gandhi in the Bharat Jodo Yatra, and I know you've said countless times that was, supporting a moment and not a party as such. But I have to ask you again, if it's no, why is it a no on joining politics?
It's comparative advantage, a big issue in economics, right? What am I better at? I think I'm better at offering ideas. I think while I was at the RBI, I implemented the ideas that I had earlier with the, I had put together a commission for Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and many of the ideas that we implemented at the RBI came from that commission, including freeing up banking. Bank branching was one of the important things we did. But I would rather sort of put out the ideas, and if somebody wants to run with them, great. I don't necessarily need to be the person to run with them. And so, I sometimes feel a little irritated when somebody says he wants to be finance minister. I mean, look, it's a pretty terrible position.
I mean, the BJP said you want to be prime minister when you walked with Rahul Gandhi. He wants to be the next Manmohan Singh.
Yeah. I mean, look, what I would like to do is to see India do a lot better. And, to the extent anybody wants to listen to me, I'm happy to advise them.
But I think as a reporter, I'm aware that there are political parties that reached out to you. Right. They wanted you to take a Rajya Sabha seat. I think the Aam Aadmi Party was keen on that at some point. There was some talk that you might work with Prashant Kishore. Did you ever at any point seriously consider, maybe your answer was no, but did you seriously consider joining politics at any point?
No, I mean, look, I think I can do as much by sitting outside. Once I become part of a political party, I have to respect the structures of that political party. And that sort of constrains you tremendously, and also reduces your ability to be trusted by others who don't belong to that party. So I think it's important to stay as independent as you can. I think on Bharat Jodo, I believed in the sentiment of that walk, which is we need to have national integration based, again, seems corny, but based on decency and love rather than on hate.
You don't see yourself as a Congress supporter?
No, as I said, I have worked with the past NDA. I'm for any sort of party that stands for, at that moment, for what the ideals of India are. And sometimes one party stands more for it than another. And what I would like to do is, strengthen the hands of those who want us to go in the right direction.
But when all these nudges and offers came to you, why don't you consider us? Why don't you consider a tenure in Parliament? And now we do know that they did. Were you tempted at any point? Did you think about it? Did you give it a serious thought? Did your wife overrule it? Did you kind of intuitively feel, no, I don't want to? Were you conflicted?
So I am, this sounds, again, the politician's answer. I am actually very happy with my job as it is, and it would take a lot to get me out of it, right? So I am able to talk about ideas. I have a lot of graduate students. I have eager young MBAs, many of whom are from India.
Yeah.
I have students. I have colleagues who are the best in the world. My co-author won the Nobel Prize last year. So, this is a great environment. And so people say, oh, you're hankering for that. No, I'm not hankering for anything.
I'm not saying you're hankering. I'm just asking you, were you tempted?
I was not. Because I would rather, while we are trying to make a change, be able to speak independently from the outside. And let's see how we can change. If the government wants to espouse some of these ideas, well and good. If some parties want to, well and good. And I'd be willing to push for the ideas.
Would you be willing to work with the Modi government again if there was an opportunity?
I think that if they, depends on, I've talked to people in the government on occasion on certain issues and given them whatever advice I can. I think it really depends on the situation.
You're not saying no. You're not saying an absolute no. You think
You're trying to pin me.
You think it's too theoretical, basically. You think it's too hypothetical.
I think it's too hypothetical.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
Let me ask you in the end, because we're almost at the end of time, the book, Breaking the Mold. And then I have one last question. But the book, Breaking the Mold, talks about an Indian way. We've done a separate conversation on the book. But I just want, for people who haven't seen that conversation, tell us a little bit about this Indian way. The basic upshot of the book, your newest book, is let's not go the low-skill manufacturing model. Let's focus on human capital. Again, there's been a lot of attention on what supporters of this government have called your pessimism about the economy. They say that you've been proven wrong. You thought, that famous phrase, lucky if we get 5%, you've been proven wrong. Are you a pessimist about the Indian economy?
No, I'm not, which is strange. I'm actually an optimist, but I want us to reach for the skies rather than reach for the, ground or even the treetops. And part of what I think we're in danger of doing is sort of based on the lessons of the past. We're trying to go down the low-skill manufacturing route with an idea of moving up. And I'm saying even if we attract the low-skill manufacturing, we're trying desperately with these subsidies and so on, it's at this point not a pathway upwards. The West is unlikely to appreciate another China coming to displace all their jobs. The path is very different because you're not competing with Western workers. You're competing with Chinese workers, with Vietnamese workers, and you're competing with robots. So it's a very different game now. And what we say in the book is, look, that path is a very, very difficult path now. There is another path which because we are a big economy and because we've already proven our ability in services. But it's also a part that doesn't exclude manufacturing. But it says, don't start by saying the point is to get industry here. Start by saying the point is to make our labor much more capable of doing any job. Then the industry will come. So focus on improving human capital. So what is the point of talking about becoming a superpower in 20 years? Some say we're already a superpower. I think they're at this point over-optimistic. But if you want to be a superpower in 20 years, think about the 35% of kids who have malnutrition now. How are they going to be part of that superpower? Are you going to have 35% of your labor force incapable of doing, work that is there in a developed country? Shouldn't you fix that now? What about the 50% of kids in fifth grade who can't do grade level math? Let's address these issues. In the process, as we address these issues, you will create enormous numbers of jobs addressing these issues, but you'll also create a workforce which can get jobs in the future. Today, 50% of our graduates are unemployable, according to one survey. So again, you're basically doing the cosmetics. How do I put the candy in the candy store without figuring out how do I first get the sugar, how do I get the flour, how do I create the inputs which create that output? And so I'm saying by neglecting the pandemic kids, by neglecting the kids in Chhattisgarh, in Jharkhand, who have a terrible education, I think we are creating the elements of pessimism down the line.
Is there anything you'd give credit to the government for doing right?
Infrastructure, fantastic job. They're building out infrastructure like there's no tomorrow, and that's good. We needed an upgrade in infrastructure. Direct benefit transfers, they took what the Congress government had started and took it to the logical conclusion, including sort of getting Nandan on board, Nilekani on board. I think that was, again, fantastic. India Stack, Nandan's creation is a great idea. Implementation is what this government, I think, has been very good at, and they deserve a lot of credit. Imagination on what that future they want to go to, I have more sort of concern about.
Okay, I want to close with a slightly lighthearted question. As RBI governor, you became a kind of household name. It was unusual for an RBI governor to be discussed, debated, followed as closely as you were. Shobha Dey famously said that you put the sex back into sex. Did you blush a few shades when you read that about yourself? How is it to go from being this Motibag middle-class boy to being this poster boy whom women were swooning over?
Well, my daughter said "ugh" when she read that. So that was.
Well, what did you say? What did your wife say?
No, look, I
were you flattered?
No, I was a little embarrassed. Actually, both of us were embarrassed because I met her.
You and Shobha?
Couple of years down the line, I met her at some reception in Mumbai. And so we avoided each other for most of the reception. I knew who she was. She knew who I was. Then we finally met, and she's a delightful lady.
Of course.
But it was, we were, for all that she writes, she's also seems reasonably conservative about about meetings. And so we were both suitably awkward. But she had a daughter, and they were delightful. Just meeting them. So, it was an episode. It created a lot of, shine around me for a little while. Hopefully the policies are what lasted rather than the shine.
Thank you, Raghuram Rajan. Latest book of Raghuram Rajan is Breaking the Mold, Reimagining India's Economic Future. But hopefully we've had a conversation both about and beyond the book. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.